Hey everyone, welcome back from your deserved break. Hope you had some time to stretch, grab some snacks, some tea, some coffee. We're going to dive straight in with a panel discussion on a topic I know that's always top of mind. We have two amazing speakers who will tell us how to measure their creative efforts. We want to hear your questions as well, so please don't hesitate to send them to us. Before we get started, I'm Kirsten van Rijn. I'm the head of video strategy at Superside. I oversee a team of talented strategists that work with our customers to create cohesive and effective approaches to singular video projects or their overall video strategies for their brands. I'm joined by Evan Lee and Bree Bush. Let me introduce them formally. Evan Lee is the head of creative strategy at Motion currently. Motion is a creative analytics company that combines visual content with performance metrics to help growth teams improve their creative strategy. Evan has been in the industry working with companies like Shoelace and Manulife. He is passionate about creative advertising and understanding the benefit of creative strategy and the process around it in order to optimize and make effective ads. This conversation's right up Evan's alley, and I'm really excited to welcome him. Welcome, Evan.
Thank you. Thank you. Excited to be here, everybody.
And our second speaker is Bree Bush. Bree is the VP of Marketing at Challenger, a training and development company transforming the sales experience through the well-recognized Challenger sales methodology. If you haven't read their approach, it's a must read. Bree enjoys writing, so her creative on the copy side is she's always had a deep appreciation for great design, and that mix of her love of copy really comes together in the creative work. I'm excited to welcome you to this session too. You're a great fit for the topic. We're very spoiled to have you both. Before we dive into the session, I'm actually going to hand over the floor to Evan to give us some thoughts on how to measure ROI on creative.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. Really appreciate the intro. Everybody, I'm so excited to be here today. Thanks for taking time out of your days. When we're talking about measuring creative, there's so many ways to take this in directions, and honestly, we're gonna unpack them some more. But the high level, when I can start to break down like measuring creative, I'm an ad guy at the end of the day. So I come from like running these ads, doing everything I do there. But the other counterpart of why it's so important is creative team members. So creative team members are ultimately producing the visual assets that are going to live in the specific ads that ad people might run at the end of the day. And once those are in platform, I like to think of it as engagement metrics and then bottom of funnel metrics. So I'll get into a lot more detail later, probably with some of these questions that come up. But engagement metrics, if we're talking videos, include things like your thumbnail retention, your thumb stop ratios, your hook rates, your click-through rates, your conversion rates. And once you can understand metrics like those, it becomes easy to diagnose and then figure out a solution for how to produce the best creative. So that's a high level of what we'll get into today, but that's my end. Thanks, Kristen.
Awesome. Bree, do you have any thoughts on this topic?
I do. Lots of thoughts on this topic, and thank you for the lovely intro. Evan, you just listed off a lot of great ad performance metrics. I've got a little bit of a spiel to help you kind of understand where I'm coming from into this conversation. So I do want to level set a little bit at the start. As Kirsten mentioned, I work for a company called Challenger. If you've ever heard of or read the book, The Challenger Sale, that's us. Challenger is a sales methodology. And since I'm in a room full of marketers and creatives figuratively, I'll give you a quick definition of a sales methodology, where a sales process is more the sequence of like steps or stages or tasks that a seller would follow to close a deal. A sales methodology is more of a framework of practices and principles that outline how sellers should approach the sales process. So think of it as the mindset and the skills a seller brings to every conversation with a prospect or buyer. When the Challenger research first came out, the findings were pretty groundbreaking. The research showed that things like your brand reputation and your product and your price, those are table stakes. You have to have a great brand and a great product, or else no one's going to buy what you're selling. But what truly differentiates a company and establishes customer loyalty is the sales experience. Do you offer unique and valuable perspectives on the market or industry? Are you helping your buyer navigate alternatives and avoid potential risks? Is it easy for your buyer to buy from you? The punchline on that research was, it's not what you sell, it's how you sell. So what does this have to do with design? I have 2 points for you. The first is around the buyer's journey, and this is most applicable to B2B. This is the visual we affectionately refer to as the spaghetti slide. We know the buying process is not linear, it's chaotic with 1,000 different touch points before a buyer actually makes a purchase. And we also know that buyers are 57% of the way down the path to making a decision before they even contact sales. Your potential customers are out there researching, learning, trying to form an opinion before they even start a conversation with you. And therein lies the first creative unlock. How can you use great design and content, of course, to support buyers during their due diligence process and create that exceptional sales experience from the very first touch point with your brand? You should be looking for ways to answer the questions that you know your buyers will have using a variety of different formats, channels, etc., before they talk to sales to make sure your product stays at the top of their consideration set. So speaking specifically to design, some examples of that might be an explainer video for competitive alternatives, which you also repurpose into a series of visual social media posts or ads, a checklist in the form of an infographic. You get the gist. And to take it even further, since we are here to talk about performance measurement and ROI, you can evaluate whether the consumption of this, call it buyer FAQ content, contributes to a shorter sales cycle. Look at buyer journey velocity or funnel velocity against the amount and type of content consumed. Are you seeing shorter time to conversion by tracking the number of days it takes from someone to go from visitor to lead, lead to opportunity, and so on, when the person interacts with this visual FAQ content? Because in an ideal world, if the buyer is getting all of their questions answered via marketing campaigns and content prior to talking to sales, they'll come in more confident in their decision to buy from you, and hopefully it'll be an easier and quicker sale. Second point on connecting great design with the sales experience, I want to talk about the sales pitch deck. Now, the cornerstone of the Challenger approach is the commercial teaching choreography. It's not as important what framework your sales team is using in their pitch conversations. I'm just using ours as an example, but what this will illustrate is the critical role that design plays in the storytelling of a sales pitch. So let me really quickly explain what's going on here. The Challenger way to pitching your product follows these 6 steps. You start with the warmer, where you show the customer you understand their business and industry and establish credibility. Then you move into the reframe, where you expose something the customer is missing about their business. It's an unrecognized problem, an incorrect understanding of the cause of the problem, or maybe even an underestimation of the size of the problem. And then we go into these 2 middle pieces of rational drowning and emotional impact. And notice where they sit on the emotional spectrum on the left there. We call this the pit of despair. In rational drowning, challengers are throwing a bunch of data points at the prospect to quantify the full cost of allowing the problem to persist, or rationalize why the status quo of their business problem is intolerable. And once the worry starts to build, we hit them with the emotional story, how the problem looks and feels, and what will happen to their business if they don't change. When we coach our clients through developing sales collateral and pitch decks and marketing campaigns to align with this approach, design plays a really big part in creating that pit of despair. We use dark backgrounds, darker imagery, for those negative stats in the rational drowning, big, bold, red numbers, or whatever negative emotion color is on brand for you. And then when you've convinced the buyer that they cannot afford not to solve this problem and doing nothing is not an option, you introduce a new path forward that leads them directly to your solution. And throughout these sections, you're using light backgrounds, bright imagery, airy, friendly, happy photography, things like that. you need the visual story in your pitch deck to enhance the verbal story that you're telling the buyer. And then once you've built this, you can lean on your sales team or your friends in marketing operations or revenue operations to help you measure its effectiveness. Add something to your CRM that tracks which pitch deck a seller uses in an opportunity to see what drives bigger deals and faster close times. These are definitely tougher metrics to track than something like ad clicks or video plays, but in a demand gen forward marketing world or function, they're necessary to using business impact to drive creative decisions. So I'll leave you with that to noodle on while we start getting into, I think, some Q&A right now. So I'll pass it back to Kirsten.
Thanks, Brie. It's such a great perspective to see how you're tracking metrics within the sales process. It's a little bit different from, I think, what we're used to in the digital advertising world. I guess then leading into that, my question is to Evan, how does creative play a role in capturing audience attention and generating meaningful engagement in ads and in performance marketing?
Really great question. And for all my performance marketers here or anyone else who it might be, creative is the #1 lever of success when it comes to everything performance marketing, when it comes to everything paid ads. And really what we're saying is in like a post iOS 14 world, creative is the new targeting. And why that's such a true statement is basically we are giving like ad platforms who have strong algorithms the information needed to determine who that ad goes to. So what that means in like layman terms is if I have a thumbnail and I include my face, but let's say we are targeting, I don't know who it might be, men who are 50 years old. I'm giving the algorithm incorrect information to go and find the right person. So that creative does not pair up with who I actually want to go after. So at that point, my ads aren't even going to deliver to the right person. So when you think about the importance of it, the entire thing is storytelling. The entire thing is giving the algorithm the right information to drive sales for you. So that's why, in a short version, why creative is the most important lever.
And Brie, if we're looking at like innovative approaches or unconventional tactics you've seen employed to effectively align brand messaging with sales objectives and growth targets.
Yeah, great question. I alluded to this a little earlier, but creative testing needs to evolve. Most people get it when it comes to the basics of A/B testing these days. You change the color of a button on an ad and see which one gets the most clicks. But tomorrow's marketers will have to go beyond that. It's not just how many clicks you get from that button color. It's how many clicks from that button turned into a conversion on a landing page that turned into a qualified opportunity, and how much pipeline are we getting from that opportunity. The button color is a bit of an oversimplification, but it illustrates the point. Can you use creative testing to evaluate whether blue buttons attract in-market leads that generate pipeline more than green buttons? I think this idea of taking your A/B test all the way down the funnel does require your creative and design functions to be deeply embedded in your sales objectives and growth goals. As an example, Challenger's marketing team is accountable to marketing sourced pipeline, not MQLs, not engagement metrics from like a high-level North Star measurement. Of course, we still track those things to assess creative, but ultimately it's all about pipeline generation and closed won revenue. And I hold my design team just as responsible for meeting our pipeline goal as I do demand gen and product marketing and everyone else on the team.
That's awesome. That's a really interesting approach. Just switching topics a little bit, Evan, in today's competitive advertising landscape, how can you advise businesses to strike a balance between data-driven strategies and the importance of creative storytelling? There's always a tug of war in a business around that.
I love that question. I'm super excited to answer it. I just wanted to add a little bit of commentary to what Brie had mentioned, because like I just want to make sure the audience is like tracking. Like that was gold in there, right? Like basically holding the creative team accountable to numbers. So that could seem intimidating, but what we're really doing is like giving that creative team a bigger seat at the table. You're not like a pencil pusher anymore at the end of the day. Like you're really just crushing it. So Brie, Kudos. That was awesome. I love it.
Thank
I love
you.
it. On my end, to get back to Kristen's question there, like highly competitive landscape, how can you strike a balance? The big thing for me is like controlling what you can control, and that's your workflow. So what I mean there is ultimately something I hear all the time is like, Evan, I need to make something. What the heck do I make? Where do I start in the grand scheme of things? I believe I have a slide that I can share with you all on this one, but I think of it as the creative strategy flywheel. If you follow these steps, you'll be in a spot to produce the best creative consistently. So what I mean by that is if we extract ourselves from like sitting down and what do we make tomorrow, we have to start in our first step of the process, which is actually research. So research involves things like combing through different reviews we have, combing through comments we have on organic social, our tagged posts, and everything in between. Because what we're really doing with research is building that ideal persona. Who is our buyer and how are we going to go after them? Once we conduct our research, this is where we can continue through the flywheel. Well, when we talk ideation, it's like, what's the appropriate look and feel? What are the appropriate angles? And what are the appropriate hooks to match up with the persona that we've gone against? And you can see here through this entire funnel, what you've really done is that you've emphasized the research to determine who is the right buyer for you. And once you have that information with options like before and after, 5-star review, this or that, any type of creative concept you have, you can manipulate that to make sure you're going after the intended audience and then following the rest of this flywheel that we see here. So that's how I think about it. Kristen, I hope that helps.
I like that. It's a nice marriage of customer pre-data and then looking at how you can tell a story beautifully to that audience. Bree, there's a question that's come up from Kate. How are you maintaining creative integrity throughout all the different pieces of collateral, like the ads, socials, and decks? And I think perhaps, Evan, if you have some thoughts here too.
Yeah, I can take a stab at it first, and then Evan can pick up from there. I think this boils down to, it may seem very simple, but your brand guidelines and style guide, I think you need to have that understood, agreed upon, and documented in a way that provides the right guideposts for creative strategy, design, etc. And then you're able to execute across any different number of channels that, that you need to within those guideposts. So I think that's the most important guiding principle there is making sure that you have that well documented and understood across your team and across the company as a whole from top down, because we all know that executives can get real nitpicky about design choices, but if you have something like a style guide to refer back to, you're good to go.
I think Bree hit a nail on the head. Like the only other thing I add is just like when we I guess it's a different lens to look at it through, but basically the style guide is a handshake agreement. I think of like on brand as a sliding scale, right? There could be a world where it's like completely off brand, but all you care about is sales. And it's like, are we cool with that as a company? Answer's probably no, but we have to be on the same page, right? Some type of style guide and brand guidelines will give you that insight.
Awesome. And Evan, looking at creative performance and creative in a campaign, can you think of any examples where the prioritization of creative has significantly impacted the overall performance? And what are the key factors that have contributed to this?
Yeah, good question. I can share one that comes to mind for me. I can't give numbers, folks, so I apologize. But in the chat, is everybody familiar with like a Facebook ads library or TikTok like content center type of thing? I'll let it roll through a little bit. Maybe not, maybe yes. Okay. Well, regardless, Facebook ad library is a really good place to just initially conduct some research to know what's going on. So a D2C brand that comes to mind for me is Mott & Bow. Not sure if anyone's heard about them, but they sell some really cool jeans in the grand scheme of things. And when you're looking in Facebook ad library, what it allows you to do, it allows you to see like how long ago something was launched and if it's currently active or not. So a really cool thing that you can start to do is like if something was launched 2 years ago and it's still live, guess what? It's crushing it. Like we know that, right? So the cool thing about Mott & Bow, when I've gone through, we work with the team, but when I go through their Facebook ads library of what gets quite interesting is you'll notice common themes across the board that are working quite well. One that I can share that I know has been impactful for them is the split screening of different creatives. Split screening is typically thought of as like before and after. So it's like, this is your previous world, this is the new world. But the way that they were leveraging split screens was quite interesting. Like they were literally just focusing on one side, the genes itself in a really close version of that. And on the other end, the reviews associated with it. So they're just taking that same amount of real estate and making sure that they have way more information for everyone to share. So that's one that I saw recently when I was combing through my nerdy Facebook ad library to figure out what was going on there.
I like that. That's a great hack. And then Bree, in terms of customer insights, how are you leveraging those and data-driven research to inform the development of creative concepts and messaging to enhance performance and drive business results? I think a little bit tying into Evan's flywheel on how the process can work. How are you leveraging that within Challenger?
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth, because I love this question. And the first thing I thought of was what Evan was just talking about. I love what she said about especially the early steps of that flywheel and the research, and then also coming all the way back around on the other end with the analytics and how that plays into your creative concepts, messaging, design, etc. I like this question a lot because it gets the idea of a data-driven design culture. Someone once asked me, what do I think is more important, ideas or data? It was actually my current leader and COO at Challenger, Allie, when she was interviewing me for this job, which tough interview question, am I right? To this day, I feel like my answer waffles between ideas or data, depending on what side of the bed I woke up on that morning. But I get a sense that some creatives and designers feel that data stifles creativity, but it's actually the opposite, in my opinion. Data inspires creativity. And what you should take away from what I said earlier about the role of creative and design in your sales messaging is that, like, designers are the architects of a great sales pitch. When you're mapping your buyer's journey and aligning your ad experiences with it, designers are the architects of the story you tell there too. And I think the customer insights and the research that you extract at the start and throughout the campaign as you're optimizing are critical to executing against the concepts and messaging and designs that go along with that campaign. So I think that's what I would say about that topic.
Cool. And then a question that has come from Whitney in the comments are, what are some examples of metrics that are appropriate to hold a creative team accountable to?
That I'll let you dive in. Just to bounce
well, I feel like that's one for you. Thanks.
I was just gonna let you in to like round out the experience there, just like managing the team and how they can be the architects. On my end, when we're thinking creative teams, I like to keep it more engagement metric focused. So what we're starting to look at there is like, if we produce a video, have we effectively gotten people to stop their scrolls? So what's like a thumb stop ratio threshold? And it's like, let's gauge the team off of that. We can continue that down the funnel to say, like, have we gotten a click-through rate we're happy with? Sales is harder just because attribution is always a little bit tricky, but I focus on those top of funnel metrics that the team can get inspired around and ultimately like build their creative around.
Cool. And then Bree, just looking at how to develop cross-functional relationships within the team, like, do you have any strategies or initiatives that have been successful in driving that collaboration and knowledge sharing within a creative team?
Yeah, great question. I think accountability is huge here. If you don't make time for learning and knowledge sharing, it won't happen. It's also top down. As leaders, it's our job to create a culture that supports collaboration and knowledge sharing. Some tips that immediately come to mind: schedule it. A predictable and recurring event completely dedicated to something like this is great for accountability and also setting expectations. Acknowledge and highlight when it happens. We love sharing wins and learnings in our team meetings, and then make it fun. We've done something called Teach Me Something Dope, not just for creative teams, but for all teams, and it was a hit. So those are some ideas that I can share.
I love those. And then just Evan, looking ahead, what emerging trends or changes in consumer behavior do you think will have the most significant impact on the importance of creative and performance marketing?
Yeah, lots of things like looming recession, iOS 17, anything that comes out there is always a little bit of an uncertainty. But I think a big thing is know your business metrics. So like where do you need to like achieve a MER or whatever success metric you look at that's going to keep you profitable. And then when we're thinking about like developing creative specifically, it's a boring answer, but I ultimately come back to like you control what you can control, which is that process. So that's why I lean so heavily into that creative strategy flywheel, more or less.
Cool. And I guess the question to you both is how do you foster a culture of experimentation and continuous improvement within your teams, particularly adapting to the changing dynamics and really identifying the scalable approach to your creative work?
Yeah, I can jump in quick here. So on my end, like I really like the frameworks, just having a general framework that people can get behind. And when Bree had gotten that question during the interview, it's like, do you care about data or ideas? I love that question. Like I feel like I want to start asking people that. But something that comes to mind for me is like giving people permission to understand like when does data matter the most versus when do ideas matter the most. So the initial like high level framework that I walk through is, hey team, are we focusing on like a net new creative? So we have a persona, let's figure out something new to go after them with. So it's like we get a chance to throw things at the wall and prioritize what makes sense. But once that creative's live in the ad account, that's where we can shift from net new creation to iteration instead. This is where you have a ton of data available to then say, okay, let's break down the data points or the modules of a video to understand where we should make a change based on data. So having a framework like that allows the team to like understand which part of their brain they're tapping into a little bit more. And how I typically wrap this into a nice present or a gift is with an agile methodology, essentially. So I call them creative sprints. And that's where you're determining whatever cadence it might be based on capacity and spend of how frequently are you going through that flywheel. Could be a 2-week cadence, could be a 4-week cadence. And you can layer on net new creative as well as iterations. Bunch of stuff I can talk about later, but yeah, that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I think that's huge. That's such a great way to structure it. And, you know, having some of those repeatable processes, the idea of a creative sprint, it helps create that culture, right? You can say it as much as you want and encourage experimentation, but if you don't have the right processes, parameters that allow for that, you're not going to be able to actually see people taking advantage of that and doing those experiments. So I think that's a really, really great piece of advice you just shared, Evan.
Awesome.
Cool. And then just looking to a question in the comments from Christy. So can you provide guidance on how we can encourage our clients and stakeholders to share metrics and results in order to improve development of creative content? Assuming Christy's in a creative team that doesn't regularly share that.
Yeah, from an internal stakeholder perspective, since I'm an in-house marketing leader, there's a need for transparency and close collaboration with marketing operations or revenue operations, and it requires some sales and marketing alignment, which I know is a cheesy buzzword, but something that we all should be striving for. The right tracking mechanisms in place in your CRM or in, all the way down the funnel. When I was talking earlier about like some of those sales metrics, you're going to have to work with those teams and collaborate for people to report back on those things. It's challenging, and you're going to have to put yourself out there to kind of extend and meet halfway on those things, but it's worth it because again, you're getting back to how the business impact of your creative and design and campaign decisions. So it's really important to make that a priority. Anything you would add to that, Evan?
From a tech partner standpoint, honestly, I have a shameless plug to Views Motion. Like, we'll make it look really good for you and you can see what's going on. But to extrapolate it beyond Motion, I take it back to like measurement of creative teams that Bree was talking about, and I shared some metrics around. It's like, understand the metrics that you want. Once you know those, you'll realize, or the client will realize, you're not asking for the world. So you can start to get information that breaks down just creative performance in general. And that should give you a place to start, is what I'd say.
Cool. And speaking of teams, do you have any tips or key skills that you look for when you're assembling your creative teams to drive both creativity and performance in your areas?
I definitely do. The one is like I need it's somewhat of a unicorn hire that can be trained, but I need someone who can like think in data or understand data or has a want to understand data, but can also be creative. So it's like literally leveraging both sides of the brain. That someone could be a project manager. We call it a creative strategist at Motion, but that's what I'm really looking for typically.
Yeah, that's huge. I think also for me, it's someone who is willing to take the initiative to bring forward new ideas. There's a great comment in the chat about the "we've always done it this way" attitude, and how, you know, designers need to be willing to come forward with something that disrupts the way that things have always been done. And I'm looking for someone who's willing to challenge me, challenge others in the organization to try new things and to bring forward those experiments. Because, you know, I have a lot of ideas, but I only have so many. And there's a lot of things that someone who is a designer first is going to bring forward that I hadn't thought of. And so, you know, I want to look for team members who are willing to put themselves out there and try those experiments instead of going with the safe bet. And I think that's a special kind of person.
That's great. And sticking to the team, what role do you think leadership plays in fostering that culture of scalability and team building within the creative and performance teams?
Yeah,
I think that one first.
I'll go first.
I think Bree go first.
Yeah. I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, you know, it comes from the top down. So you have to set an example in this case of, you know, encouraging that kind of experimentation, scalability, all those things that you just mentioned, and be the one bringing forward those concepts too. You know, you got to get the brainstorm started. So as your job, you know, as a leader, you create the right space for it. Maybe you're setting aside time for those kinds of things, and you start the brainstorm, and then you let everyone have a seat at the table and bring forward their ideas too. That's what I would say.
Love that. And in my end, like I have a bias for startups. Like I love the startup world and small, tight teams. So take that with a grain of salt, everybody. But I really lean into like, what role does leadership play into it? I lean into the ownership that Bree is talking about. So I really like to think of it as like individual team members who feel safe enough and empowered enough to come to the table with those ideas. And leadership's role in that, it could be as like, I don't like dictatorships more than anything, but what I like to do is rotate ownership of meetings. So it's just like, hey, I might run one and here's a general structure we could follow, but Bree, here's another one. You jump in. What are some ways you think we can make it better? Get everyone thinking. So not everyone doesn't only own, hey, this is my contribution to the meeting, but they can think about like, how would this be done better if it was to fall into their world? Again, startup heavy, but thoughts that come to my mind.
That's interesting. And thinking of like technology and how you can streamline and use automation tools to drive creative workflows. Evan, do you have any thoughts on how those kind of tools and the new technologies, particularly around AI, can start to facilitate scalability while maintaining the creative excellence within your team?
100%. So I talk a lot about research, right? Like it's like build your personas, and it's like what angles do we use and all of that kind of stuff. So I never see, at least I might have a blind eye to it, but I don't think AI is ever going to replace a designer at the end of the day. We've seen some stuff that doesn't look great, but ultimately where I think AI can really empower designers is you can just like prompt a chat GPT to say, hey, go collect all of my reviews off of Amazon and rank it from 5-star to 1-star. So you're just starting to see what people like. You can tell it to scan your website or comb through a bunch of data that's available to build out those personas. And that just gives you a starting place for who you're going after. And then all of a sudden you get to walk in, be that creative person and say, ooh, it's already available. This is what I can pair them up with. So there's I think when we're talking AI, there's a lot of opportunity. That's one of them that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, and one of the things we talked about when we were prepping too is the idea of like personalization and personalization at scale, where AI can play a huge role in enabling that and making that possible in creative campaigns and serving, different kinds of ads based on the viewer, right? Something that immediately comes to mind for me is Spotify Wrapped. Every year they aggregate your listening activity into like a Instagram story-ish set of videos with your top artists and your most listened to songs, hours spent listening. I think they even started doing your mood based on what you listen to, which I will not share mine because it's embarrassing, but super personalized, but also super shareable, right? The fact that it's been designed to be shared on social media is great for reach, but also like the community engagement and a sense of belonging within that community. And, it's all algorithmic AI powered. It's something that everyone can start tapping into in their own creative, especially with the proliferation of AI tools that can help enable some of this like customization, personalization in your creative, in your ad campaigns.
Nice. I think we've got time for 2 more questions. So I'm just going to throw it out, and whoever would like to have a go, we can answer. So in terms of scalability, what considerations are you keeping in mind when expanding into new markets or targeting different customer segments with your creative efforts?
I can jump in.
You look like you have an answer. Yeah,
I can jump in quick. Just like with the performance marketing side of things, like we're lucky to get data back in the grand scheme of things, right? So there's 2 parts to it. There's the creative itself, but there's also just like understanding the algorithm and like what information you're getting back, right? So when we start on the data end, if you're slowly making your way into new markets, you can start to see like, where is Facebook or Meta, for example, determining to spend my budget? I might open it up to 3 geographies, but I notice budget's only going to 2 of them. So that means I have my work cut out for me to get into the other ones, or like I basically need to reevaluate my creative approach. So the data can start to tell you what's going on. And then creatively speaking, it just depends in like where in the world you're starting to break into. I've said personas a million times already. Because I believe in them so much. It's just like understand who you're going after in those geographies. And then it's the basics. So it's just like when you develop the creative, make sure it matches the language in the areas, which will help deliverability of your ads. So the short version of that is like the data will help determine like what people are or where the algorithm wants to lead into you for you. And then depending on the data, you can make changes based on persona, language, everything in between.
Yeah, personas are huge there too. My mind in that question went to probably because we just recently had a go-to-market product launch. So this is at the front of my mind based on recent experience, but it really gets back to that, defining those personas. If you are launching a new product or launching a product to a new customer segment or a new market, really huge to define that from the get-go and get into not just the demographics, but the psychographics of that person. What do they care about? What I hate saying what keeps them up at night, but what are the problems that they're facing and that are most important to them, and speaking to it. The choreography I talked about earlier, we call it a commercial insight, and that's really what we're getting to in that commercial insight is nailing the messaging down to that business problem that they're facing and what they may not know about it. And that really is kind of a critical part of our persona building process too. So that I think is the first step that has all the downstream impact into the creative implications, messaging implications, everything like that.
Cool. There's an interesting question here in the comments from Jacqueline. In more conservative industries, how do designers challenge without disrupting relationships? Oh, that's a tough one. Evan, do you have any thoughts on that?
On how designers manage up essentially during this process is kind of how I think about it, right? So slower industries, just to define it a little bit more, what I think of are like maybe large B2B companies or like financial institutions or commercial real estate, like falling into that world. The biggest thing that I always try to recommend is like, don't just be a pencil pusher. all of the briefing systems and all the processes in place are ultimately set up for you to receive a brief and then create against that in a templated format, right? And the biggest thing that I always recommend as a starting place is like to play the game of pencil pusher, receive the brief, but is there any way that you can make the template like maybe 5 times better? 5 times is a lot, sorry. 5% better coming in there. So diving in and thinking about it like that. But ultimately, over time, what my hope is, at least, is when I talk about left brain and right brain at the beginning of this conversation, is that the designers are confident enough and able enough to actually build relationships with like the marketing managers who are submitting some of these requests. How are they thinking about the world? How does that then shape into design? So now that context is going to allow you to make better recommendations that are a lot more informed, and hopefully you feel more confident about what you're recommending in that case. So a little bit of what I think of.
Yeah, and let the creative testing and data speak for it. You know, if someone wants to tell you we've never done this before, so no, you say, well, how do you know until we test it? It's like, bring it forward, do a test against a control group, you know, get a little scientific with it, and let that, you know, decide whether it's something that you should continue doing, especially in those more conservative industries that might be resistant to change or not as open to new ideas. It's like, we don't know until we try, and let the audience tell you what you should be doing.
And I think that also goes back to a previous question that an audience member had asked, like, how do we get data back from these people we work with? So in that instance, we spoke about clients, but this is also another instance where your client is technically like a marketing manager or someone else, right? So that goes back to understanding like what metrics that you would want to ask for, because once you make that request, it allows you to quantify. And then that's some of the data like Bree speaks about that lets you have that bigger picture and better story.
Great. I think we can squeeze in one more question, and it's really about future thinking. So are there any strategies or approaches you anticipate implementing in your teams or would recommend the audience implement in their teams to help build scalability in creative and performance and the marketing endeavors of businesses? Bree, would you like to kick this one off?
Yeah. What immediately came to mind for me at Challenger, we made the shift to an account-based marketing approach for our paid advertising campaigns this year, and it has opened the doors for our team to experiment in lots of ways, even getting back to the personalization that I was talking about earlier, more so than we've been able to do in the past. I'll share one example of what we're dabbling in right now. Like many others in this market, we're heavily focused on retaining and growing our existing client accounts. And we work with some complex enterprise accounts where we may only work with a few business units or divisions, and we want to expand into others. And we're exploring digital ad campaigns targeted to those specific accounts using ABM software that surfaces a specific case study or performance results from our work that we've already done with that account in those other business units and divisions to break into the ones that we're not into. So it's a different flavor of personalization, and we're still in testing, but we're optimistic in that being a repeatable strategy that we can use for expansion and retention with current clients.
We got to talk about that offline, Bree. That's awesome. I love the account-based piece. I'll take it the route. So Bree's taking it the really strong tactical, and I don't think I can add more value than her there. I'll take it to like the personal like advice recommendation on that level. So audience members, what I'll say here is I've spoken about left brain and right brain folks. If you're more right brain, I'd say like get started and try to learn more of the left and be creative. And then if you're more left brain and creative, try to start learning some of that data. Now, you might be thinking like, Evan, what the heck? How the hell do I even start with that, right? So if everyone can remember with that flywheel I showcased, what you'll notice here is like, just pick a place and that's where you can begin. So what I mean by that is our data-oriented people, it's going to be very natural for you to look at a thumb stop ratio, a CTR, and make recommendations. So start there. That's allowing you to be creative. So you're identifying where to make the change. As a creative person on your ends, you're very, very comfortable being in a CapCut, a Canva, an Adobe, wherever it might be, and that's where you live. The next step for you is like literally asking, like, where is this going to live? Like, is it going to be in social media? Okay, what metrics do I care about? And then the media buyer can advise you. And just taking that first step to learn a little bit more about the other side is what I've seen work wonders for a lot of people who I believe are in this audience and who I've chatted with in the past.
Great. I think that's all we have time for. So thank you so much, Evelyn and Bree, for your time and sharing your insights. It's been really great. I'm really excited to see how our audience can take some tactical things back to their teams. And I guess that's all from us.